Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I am here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we are going to be looking at how to assess a problem statement. If you are new to the ACU Online Writing Center, we work with students through a variety of programs, through webinars such as this, through various resources we've developed and placed on our webpage, like sample papers, explanations of certain topics, APA course paper templates to save you a lot of time on formatting, and through appointments where you can get feedback on your writing. Most students make what we call asynchronous appointments. That means you schedule a time. By that time, you upload a copy of your paper, and then we send you feedback within 24 hours. So for example, if you made an appointment with my colleague Julie for, say, 8 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday, by 8 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday, you would want to upload your paper, give any special requests for feedback that you might have, and then by 8 p.m. on the following Thursday, Julie would have some feedback for you in your inbox. We do have a number of openings right now for people who want to request a real-time appointment to get feedback via phone or Zoom. And that is something we're happy to provide as capacity allows. So if you're asking now in the first or second week of a term, not too much of a problem. If you're asking at the end of week 7, where everyone's trying to get their final papers in, might not be the best time to get on the schedule. But if you have a large document, like say you're working on your concept proposal or a chapter or something like that, you can always go ahead and schedule an appointment during those week 0 periods where we tend to have excellent availability. So if you've finished working on a chapter and you want to start marching through process of editing and revising that, great time to make an appointment. And we do recommend that you sign up for appointments sooner rather than later because we do get rather busy as the semester gets on. All right, let us talk about some of the things that we're going to focus on today. We are going to spend some time talking about what makes a clear problem statement, and then we'll talk about how this extends into what you go writing up, documenting, explaining, expanding upon in the problem statement assignment, the problem statement article summaries assignments in Leadership 765. Now, I see that a couple people have shared some details about what they're studying or interested in studying, and great, those help me customize examples we give, both in terms of oral discussion and what we search for, and also I appreciate that people have shared some details about what they're working on right now. So one of the reasons you want to have a clear problem statement is that it sets the boundaries for what you are trying to do. And by setting those boundaries, you are able to see what is in scope and out of scope. For example, if you are looking at educational technology adoption in, let us say, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chattanooga, Tennessee is a special place because it was the test center for Google Fiber's high-speed internet rollout. It is really inexpensive and really easy to get very, very high-speed internet. In fact, they set up a lot of places where there's just high-speed wireless all over the place for free. Now, if we're talking about doing a educational technology rollout that required wireless stuff, and you said, well, the problem is here in Chattanooga, these are going to be different conditions than if, say, we are in, let's say, San Francisco, where if you're trying to install citywide wireless, you've got this problem of it's really expensive to dig there anywhere because the city is old. And the wireless signals don't travel well because of all the hills and all these other things. So if you define the problem that you're addressing, the specific problem that you're addressing in a particular geographic context or in an area or a specialty, you're able to define what is and isn't in scope. And that not only informs where you go with the purpose of your study, but especially when you are crafting your research methods for chapter 3, and when you're determining what you have to discuss in the literature review. Now, I'm happy to meet with you later, or if you're working on one of those things, to give you some feedback there. But usually when someone is working on the literature review and they're asked to check the problem statement, it comes up because there is what appears to be an alignment issue. Sometimes you've just written a lot of stuff that doesn't fit with the scope of the problem statement, or perhaps your study has evolved and you've come up with a new focus. And so by revising the problem statement, it can be brought into line with the rest. And so with some modifications, you can make it clear, oh, this does fit together. We just had to make sure that the text I wrote early on in the process aligns with what I'm doing now. And that is, if you are in that particular situation yourself, I would say, go ahead, make an appointment with me and put in the comments or the special request box that you're given feedback related to the problem statement and the lit review chapter. And then I would look at that first. So whenever you're giving us a large bit of text, if there's a particular concern you have, absolutely mention things like that, because it helps you get the feedback that you want the most. All right, so let's talk about some specifics here now. First of all, what makes a problem statement? Let's distinguish here between two things. The problem statement can be referred to a sentence that lays out the problem statement, or it's also the name of a larger section, usually of 1 to 3 paragraphs, that describes and elaborates this in, of course, more detail than you can do in just one sentence. This is one of the reasons why sometimes you'll see a section labeled as statement of problem, so that you don't confuse that one sentence thing and the 1 to 3 paragraph thing. So using the term problem statement to refer to the sentence that lays out very succinctly, very concisely, the problem you're focusing on. Well, we want to make sure first that there's a recognizable problem or issue. Second, that it's clear who this is or what this is affecting. It should also be clear that this is something that is significant, something that is important. As an example of a problem that is probably not important enough to do a doctoral dissertation research here, I live in a neighborhood. We have bunnies. The bunnies will sometimes attack my garden. Now, for me, residential household of 1, the fact that the rabbits eat the onions is not terribly important. Now, if I were, say, if my scope was, backyard gardeners all over, well, that starts to add up to, rabbits can eat an awful lot of onions if we're talking about the city as a whole or the whole United States. So we need to make sure that the scope is both the scope that you're looking at and the size of the problem itself are actually something that merits your investigation, your study. You do want to have the sentence that lays out your problem statement either at the beginning or end of a paragraph, because that way its position helps inform how we read and interpret what came before, what comes after, and also that it's clear, oh yeah, this is an important sentence to pay attention to. We want the problem statement to be supported by clear evidence, but that's usually not going to happen in the sentence itself. Now, if it's a well-documented problem that perhaps you're looking at in a specific context, then maybe it's something that you can ground it in a citation, and that will provide some evidence. But that's not going to be in the body of the sentence itself. And I would say you usually want your problem statement for a dissertation to be 1 or 2 sentences in length. Why 1 or 2? Well, sometimes you have 2 levels of detail that you're giving. The general problem and the specific problem. So for example, if you were doing research on, let's say, teacher retention is a big nationwide problem in the United States. But if we're looking at teacher retention in a small Alaskan town on, let's say, the island of Sitka, Alaska, this isn't quite like in New York City, say, where you can have a lot of people are moving to New York all the time. You might be getting a lot of teachers and stuff. If you're dealing with teacher retention in Sitka, Alaska, you need to fly and take a ferry to get there. So that is not a short journey. And there are particular things about that thing where if you're zeroing in on Sitka, Alaska, we're not going to care a lot about what happens in those big cities that have all these alternatives. We're going to be looking primarily about things in this other sort of very isolated rural context and be talking about, oh, the high cost of living, but what are the incentives that we're going to bring in and things like that. I did have a friend who taught in Sitka, Alaska, by the way, and she said one of the perks was that all of her neighbors would go fishing for salmon and they'd come back and say, my freezer is full, have 20 pounds of salmon. Terrible problem to have. So we want to be clear about the scope. And if it's one of those things where you're differentiating between the general problem, okay, nationwide, low teacher retention leading to high costs and turnover and impacts on the students, or the specific problem beyond that, like, oh, in this particular place, it's really a problem. So let's talk about the problem statement section. This is, again, usually 1 to 3 paragraphs because you don't want to give too much information because this is being given as the introduction for a larger part of your paper or dissertation. So 1 to 3 paragraphs usually. And yes, it will have that problem statement sentence or sentences if you're doing the general and specific, but also going to be looking at this and saying, okay, well, we're really focusing in on what's the problem, and then let's give evidence for its existence. What's the gap here? Sometimes you'll see it described as what's the pain, what's causing trouble for people, but what is stopping us from addressing the problem? And usually in the EdD program, this will be either a practice gap, sometimes called an implementation gap, or a research gap. And let's break those down. A practice gap is when we know or kind of know what should be done, but for whatever reason, it's not being done there. This might come up where you say, oh, well, the solution is pay people tons of money. Well, there are lots of reasons why a district in a small, isolated Alaskan town might not be able to pay a competitive salary to get someone from, say, New York City to move out there and teach. And that's before we get into the weather. So there may be a known barrier, and so you're trying to find other ways to get around it. And then in that case, we're looking at a research gap, that there's something that is not known how to do this, and we're trying to find that out. So the gap is something where by bridging the gap, we believe the problem can be addressed. We also, in this section, want to demonstrate the importance. What happens if the problem is not addressed? Now, that might be where we have to increase class sizes. It might be where they have to spend a lot of money and then something else in the town isn't getting built or funded. Any number of things. And by listing these, you underscore the severity of the problem and build a case that there is a need to address this because we want our research to be useful. We want it to ideally have some life and not just be an arbitrary exercise in thinking about things. And this is one of the characteristics that differentiates professional doctorates from many dissertations that can be written with a Doctor of Philosophy degree, where that thought exercise may be considered good in and of itself. But an EdD, a DNP, Doctorate of Business Administration, a DBA, any of these kind of professional degrees tend to be much more focused on, hold on, we see a problem that's affecting people and we want to solve it. One way to summarize these things that we were talking about earlier is called the 5W2H method. What does that mean? Well, we've got 5 question words starting with a W and 2 more starting with an H. What is going on? What's the problem? When is it happening? Usually right now is the case here, but sometimes it might be, well, someone's retiring and now we need to do a search. And the searches haven't done well because all of our superintendents all retire after 1 year. We have to do the problem again. So when is usually either now or imminent when you're doing a professional doctorate dissertation. Why? Again, there's some sort of consequence that we don't want to have happen or continue to happen. Where is it going on? What's our context here? And who is being affected by this? Who has this problem? How is it going on? And how much of an issue is this going to be? So what's the size? What's the scope? So at this point, I'd like you to tell me a little bit more about what interests you, what problems you are considering exploring, so that when we go into this next section, that we can do some specific examples here. Now, I am going to be talking about the problem statement article summaries assignment in Leadership 765, which comes up in both week 2 and week 3. And it's more or less the same assignment, where you're asked to go in and find some articles and to look for certain specific criteria about them to quote and describe and to deliver those results in a specific template. Now, I have the instructions here, but the gist of it is there are certain questions that you are being asked to answer and to present those answers in a particular format. Our format is going to be in a table, this table here, and you can see the pieces of information. We need to have the reference citation. Okay, not a problem. A permalink. This is a link that anyone can use to get to the article in question. The problem statement from the article. Now, this is an area where a lot of people go astray and they think, oh, I'm supposed to write up the problem statement in my own words because you're used to paraphrasing and not quoting. This is, in fact, asking you to give a direct quote, which should include a page number citation, and it should be specifically of the problem statement. That note, do not copy and paste a purpose statement. That hasn't always been there, but it has always been a problem where people get the two confused. So the problem statement is, here's what's going on. Purpose statement is, here's what I plan to do to address that problem that's going on. Now, the discussion of the problem, this is where you go into some of the details of the problem statement paragraph or paragraphs. We extract details and we say, okay, so here are the things that they're identifying and how they're approaching this problem, how you define it. So again, when I was referring to teacher retention in Alaska, you could define it as a financial problem. We just need to pay people enough to come and live here. And that is one way to do it. It's probably not the one that will be undertaken because it tends to be the most expensive. Now, if you were looking at it in a different way and you're saying, well, okay, we're trying to take care and go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs and say, okay, what basic needs do we need to cover for people to consider here? And like, oh, we've got a house, it's all set up, we supplied it with things, we've got a winter wardrobe and stuff, and we'll fly you home to visit the mainland once a year or twice a year. Then you say, okay, well, they're approaching this problem from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so here are the things that they highlight as, here are these sub-problems or components of the problem that need to be done. Evidence of the problem, people usually don't have terribly much trouble with this. But the deficiency of evidence, this is something where you do make sure to read the explanation. So you should be describing how they identified something not being known. And sometimes this gets misinterpreted as, oh, critique the author, say what they didn't write down, what they didn't present in evidence. And that's an incorrect understanding. This prompt, deficiency of evidence, this is asking you to show what was the gap that the authors identified. And then beneficiaries of the study. Sometimes this is more clearly stated than others. Sometimes it's not. But again, if you stick to answering the question of, okay, well, who benefits from their having investigated this? Who can apply what they learn? And that will be a very easy section to do. So at this point, I am going to go ahead and change so that we are looking at two things. Oops, sorry, that's a slide from a presentation I was just doing. We're going to switch to do two things. First, I am going to share a copy of the APA course paper template. And we are going to talk about what goes in there in terms of formatting, because some people have had trouble with interpreting the instructions in the past. So if you load this page that I have shown here, this will get you to a Google Drive share in which I have a number of APA templates that I've developed for use at the university. And I've even gone ahead and I've taken the table from this course and I have put it into the template to save a little time here. So if you go ahead and look in the APA 7th edition materials folder there, you will find this document here that I am sharing here. It's just a copy of the template where I took out things we didn't need and I pasted in the table and I gave it a heading, article number 1. Now you'll see that that is an APA level 1 heading. That means that it is centered, it is bolded, and that is what we should be using to introduce each copy of this table. So you see article number 1, and then article number 2, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and we are going to now look at a particular article. So tell me in the chat window, what is a problem that is interested in you? A problem or issue that in your professional practice or that you would like to be part of your dissertation perhaps, what is a problem that interests you? And if you are thinking about something you don't want to share it with a group, you can send me a direct message. Just select the to Basil Considine option in the chat window, and then you can send it to me privately. Okay, we got a couple. Thank you. So let us go ahead and we are going to go ahead and head off to the ACU library website. I'll change my share over to that. All right, so the request here was that we look at burnout and elementary school teacher. And there are a couple of ways that you could search for this, and it's always a good idea if you have the time to chat with one of our librarians. You can do that online chat. We could do it right now, in fact, and ask, well, what search terms should I use? But I'm going to start out with elementary school teacher burnout and see what we come up with here. I'm expecting a lot of results. And so one of the things we're going to do is narrow that down. So let's see what comes up here. Almost 20,000 results. Yes, we definitely want to narrow that down. So if you look at the assignment instructions, one of the things it says is recent literature and recommends 5 years. Now, if these are things that you might be using in your dissertation, I'd say, well, let's not go back all the way 5 years. Let's start with looking at 3 years back, because that helps ensure that it's material we might potentially use in the dissertation and have it be within 5 years of when the dissertation is presented and defended. And you'll see that we still have 3,600 results here. So I think that's pretty good. We're not feeling overly restricted here. So let's go ahead and let's also make this restricted to peer-reviewed journal articles. And that should limit it a little bit at least, down to 2,700. Okay. Full text, meaning I want to see everything now to be able to get to everything. So if it requires ordering something from interlibrary loan, we can certainly do that. But just for this assignment, we don't need to go so far. And you can see I still have 2,200, so that's good. And let's see if we can do some more here. I'm going to go ahead and add in United States in quotation marks, because I'm not really concerned with burnout in, say, the United Kingdom. I'm just working here in the US. So let's go ahead and see what that restriction does. Okay, about 1,000. All right. I think that now I'm going to be even more particular. And let's say we are working on the state of Texas. Now, one of those reasons why you want to keep your scope narrow is that it is almost never possible to read everything that is published on a subject, because more things will continue to come out. And so when you are eventually writing up your literature review chapter, you start it with a literature search methods section, just a paragraph or two where you say, okay, here's where I searched. Here are the terms I used. Here are things like the date restrictions and only looking at peer-reviewed articles. And you also state when you stopped searching. Because if you don't stop searching, each time something comes out, you'll have to read it. So, but if you say, oh, okay, I stopped in, let's say, June 2021, then another reader says, oh, okay, that's why they're not talking about things that were published later that year. So we're going to go ahead and look at this first article here. So this is from the journal Teaching and Teacher Education. It is called The Influence of Multiple Life Stressors During Teacher Training on Burnout and Career Optimism in the First Year of Teaching. All right, that sounds like it is related to what I'm doing here. And I'm going to, before I fill anything else, I just want to find out, does this article have the things that I am looking for? And in this case, the main thing I'm looking for besides is it on the topic, is there a problem or issue that is clearly described here? And so here's a time-saving tip here. First, one of the great things about doing a full text search here is that I can search for a particular word. So I'm going to hit Command F on my Mac. This would be Control F if I was in a Windows computer. And I'm going to search for the word problem. Now, they don't use that particular word here, but they might be using something else. So I'm going to search for issue. And see, they're talking about stress. Okay, maybe. And they don't mention it. They don't use the word issue very often. So I need to do a little bit more looking. It's very helpful if you use the word problem or issue when you are listing your problem statement. I recommend using the word problem for full alignment. But you'll find that not everything in the literature does. So let's find out where they're describing something. Now, a helpful word to use when searching is the word gap, because if there's a discussion of a gap, it's probably happening around where they're describing a problem. So this sentence here says, the present study seeks to address this gap. So like, okay, so they've mentioned a problem somewhere close to this. And let's see, I'm going to go ahead and read this paragraph here. The transition from pre-service training into the first years of career teaching is an important, potentially sensitive period for early career teachers' well-being and longevity in the teaching profession. To illustrate, feelings of positivity and optimism felt by teachers at the beginning of their training often turn to disillusionment as they enter the classroom during the later student teaching portion of training. These trends may be due in part to the high prevalence of chronic work-related stress, psychological distress, fatigue, and burnout experienced by teachers once in the classroom. As a result of this, it is important to understand the role of stress and the prevalence of early attrition in teachers' decisions to leave the profession. Although previous work has identified common challenges faced by teachers once they're in the classroom, there's been little examination of whether and how a variety of stressors that extend into teachers' lives before they begin their careers affect how they progress through their early teaching career. Okay, so I think I have an idea of the general problem here. They're not identifying it as clearly as I'd like, but they're clearly describing a problem. And I'm just going to look here and see if there is a clear description before they go into the detailed sections here. So these sentences here are really describing the purpose of the study, saying, okay, this seeks to address this gap by doing X. In addition, we also sought to understand. So they're trying to address the knowledge gap. Great. Down here, they're talking about the results. Okay, why is it important to do this? All right, we'll need that later. In addition, this may be particularly valuable in informing that. Okay, yes, they'll also come in handy later. Same thing here. All right. So now I'm going to look at this paragraph here. Now, what headings you have in a journal, these aren't always the headings that the original authors make. Sometimes they are headings that are added or suggested by the editor. And that might be as part of giving it more of a narrative flow than a functional one to make it seem less dry. And so sometimes you have a section that might be the problem statement section, where they delve in and say, okay, here's exactly what we're interested in. And it's not labeled that. Now, I would say that these sentences here are very likely the problem statement for this article. Because listen to it. Teachers at all levels report pervasive negative career-related experiences, including prolonged stress, burnout, and low job satisfaction. That is a general problem statement, if I've ever seen one. And the sentence right after that says, importantly, pre-service teachers report these negative experiences before they even begin their careers, and these factors may play a role in many teachers' decision to leave the field. Now, I mentioned editorial style coming in. If you were writing this for your dissertation at ACU, I would recommend that each sentence be introduced like this. The general problem is that teachers at all levels report pervasive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The specific problem is that pre-service teachers report these negative experiences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Having those sentences as being introduced by something that says, here's what I'm telling you. The general problem is blah. The specific problem is blah. That lets your reader know without a doubt, without having to question and check around to see if you get more specific later. It tells you what the problem is. Now, in this case, having read through this, I'm like, this is the problem statement. It's a two-part one, but this is the problem statement. I know this article has the problem statement that I need. So let's go ahead and we're going to start filling things in here. So the first thing we need is the reference information here. This as it would go in your references entry. And you see this cite button here? Well, this is is really helpful for saving time. But most of these are set up if you're going to be using a citation manager like Zotero, or if you're going to be doing some of the formatting yourself. So while it does help, if we actually go back to the catalog here, let's see if it has a citation button. And in fact, we have one here. So if I click on this, it will pop open this menu. And we can scroll down and get to APA. And while it's always good to proofread these because sometimes information gets left out or isn't formatted correctly, it is a big time saver. So here we have the reference entry for this article. So I can select this and I can copy and paste it into my Word document. And in fact, that's what we're going to do in just a moment. But we're going to go ahead and look at this article. And I noticed there weren't any page numbers in that thing here. Let's see if we look at this. Now, it doesn't tell us any page numbers up here. Let's try show more. Does that give us no page numbers here? But if we use this download PDF link, I bet this will have page numbers on it because this will show us how this looked when it was published here. And if we scroll down, well, we see it was internally paginated. Got 1, 2, and so forth. But look at this here. Do you see this 102910? So that is not something that we saw. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it right at the top. We have the name of the journal, Teaching and Teacher Education. We have the volume number, 86. We have the year it came out, 2019. We have 102910. So when we were looking in the catalog, it didn't show us that number here. What that number is, that is the article number. So for something that is published online, usually if it's an online only journal, it may have things that are arranged in format, so it looks nice when you print it out. But online journals often don't have continuous pagination where the first article starts on page 1 or something, and then the next one starts on page 12. Now, if it's an electronic only article, it may have what's called an article number, this 102910, and that would go where the page range information would go. All right, so let's go ahead and let's look at this by going to Word, where we have that handy dandy table all set up. So first off, you should be seeing my screen in Word here. So we've got the citation. All right. Well, we delete the instructions and go ahead and we will paste from the document. Is it perfect? No, not quite. We've got a couple things to change here. So first of all, you can see how this has this tab indent. So we're going to remove that tab indent here. And then we're going to add a hanging indent, which I can do by pressing Command T on my Mac or Control T on my PC. And that will get you this nice 1/2-inch indent here. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look through and check the capitalization here. Now, in your reference section, the title of the article should be in sentence case. And we've got some terms that are capitalized in the middle there. Well, we're going to change those to sentence case. And that happens, there's a shortcut button here where I can change case and set that to lowercase. Great, nice and fast. Now I just need to add that article number. And that is going to be 102910. Now, something to know about article numbers. Some journals will helpfully place a letter at the beginning like E102910 or A102910, which makes it very clear that that's an article number. This one does not happen to do it, but this is the correct way of citing it. If you ever get a question from a faculty person saying, "Hi, I think you didn't format the page range right," the response is, "Oh, that is an article number," and you can show them it on the original article, or you can, if you asked us at the Writing Center and we said, oh, that's an article, here's article number, here's how it look, you can reference that correspondence, because it's not something that happens all the time. It's one of those less obscure cases one of those less common, more obscure cases that comes up in APA style. So your professor may not be familiar with it. All right, next up, permalink. So permalinks are going to be something we want to get from the catalog. So if we go ahead and go back to the web browser, now the DOI, the digital object identifier, is related to, but not the same thing as a permalink. The idea with a permalink and a DOI, what they have in common is that they're supposed to help you find the article. The DOI, the idea is it will always point wherever it lives. The permalink is how to get there from your catalog. So in this case, we're in the library catalog here, and we were using the cite button earlier. Let's close that out. And so what about permalinks? Well, we've got a couple options, things we can do here. Now, if we were looking at this, we have a couple things we could do. Let's go ahead and click on this here. Now, earlier, I just clicked on full text because I wanted to look at the article. We're going to click on the title of the article here and get to the catalog entry for this article, because we'll see more options, more features than when we're just looking at the search results. And one of these you'll see here on the right-hand side, we've got a number of things. We've got a cite button, great. That's going to get us the same place we were earlier. But there's also this permalink button. And this gives us something that we can go ahead and copy and then paste into the permalink field in our document. And what that does, it's not terribly user-friendly in the sense of, you look at it and you're not sure where it's going to go. But if I paste it into my web browser, it will take me to this entry in the ACU catalog. All right, next up, the problem statement. So one of the things that people run into here is that they paste it, but they don't mark it as a quotation. So let's make sure to do that. And knowing that this is something that is very easy to forget, I'm going to put in some quotation marks before I go and copy and paste it from the document. And remember, these are these two sentences that we found at the beginning of a section. And so because we're going to be quoting this, we're going to take the page numbers from the PDF version of this. So let's take a look at this. Now, you could quote from this web page version, in which case you would go and count the paragraphs and say, okay, well, this is paragraph number 1, and then this is paragraph number 2. And so instead of page 5 or page 6, you would cite it as PARA period 2. But generally, life is easier if you are using the PDF version, because now we have a neat page number here. All right, so earlier we said, okay, these are the general and specific problem statements. Great, so we're going to go grab that. We remember, okay, this is page 2. And so back to that template in Word. And paste that in. And then I go ahead and add my page citation there. Now, if we were being really strict about it, like if this was a standalone thing where you're quoting the page name, you would probably give the author and the date. So it wouldn't be incorrect to say, well, okay, we've got more than 3 sources here. Okay, so I could just say Taylor, 2019, page 2. That's not incorrect. But because this is in a table, in a section about just this article, we don't need to have the author data information here, but that's how you would include it if you were going to do it. It's not wrong to have it there. Now, just because you're writing an APA 7th edition and you normally, sorry, you should have et al there, Taylor et al 2019. Now, if you are writing your own text in APA a 7th edition, you would abbreviate anything with 3 or more authors to that. You don't change this in the quoted text. It's a quotation. It's as it was in the original. All right, discussion of the problem. That's not going to be terribly much trouble, but I think we have time to look at that. So let's go ahead and look and see how they set up this problem in the article. And by the way, if anyone else has something where they'd like to see a search in action and that process of finding the problem statement, just send me a message in the chat room and we can go from there. All right, so let's see. Here we have the general problem statement, the specific problem statement, and now we have evidence to support that. Okay, high rates of attrition have been observed. Evidence that this is a problem. Up to 50% leave within the first 5 years of teaching. By the way, I used to work for a university in Southern California where they had real incredible turnover of things. They would hit 50% in one of our local districts in 2 years of teaching. And that is a lot of hiring to be doing all the time. Okay, this high attrition rate is concerning as frequent teacher turnover has been shown to negatively impact student learning. Now, one of the reasons when you are writing your own problem statement later to be careful about the order is if you had taken this statement and started the paragraph, we would think that the focus was going to be on the impact on student learning as being the problem itself. But the way this is set up, the problem is, okay, there's just negative experiences all around, and this adds up to strongly impacting the decision to leave teaching. Okay, so they say, all right, there's a research gap here. And so because you don't know that, it's worth looking into that. So there's some attention that's being drawn here to factors such as career optimism. How do I know? Well, they've got this whole paragraph here about it, and then another paragraph about it. And based on what's going on here, it looks like this is a major focus of how they are investigating this. Now, how do these factors impact career optimism specifically? Or the problem being teachers' career optimism is getting crushed. So that is the kind of thing that I would put into the discussion of problem section. So let's talk about how that would look a little bit. And again, the goal here is to do what the instructions tell you to. So I'll just start talking here and start writing here. Okay, and let's see, you could write Taylor et al, or you could just write the authors. It's going to be much the same. And is it career optimism or problems with or declining career optimism as a major element in the and then if they happen to go about and start mentioning a theoretical lens that they're using, then you can delve into that as well. Something that they're using to explain the problem. And if we go back and look at the article, you'll see that they talk about stress, then move into burnout. And then we get into the description of the specific study that they're doing. And that's actually worth looking at here because it does have a relevant piece. We addressed two primary research aims. First, we sought to examine the direct effects of teachers' daily hassles and lack of school support experienced during the senior year pre-service training on their career optimism at the end of the first year teaching. So when you read that, this is reinforcement that, oh, career optimism is this key factor that they're looking at in understanding and exploring the problem. Great, so that's confirmation that is something because they wove that into the study. And then we've got their second one. Okay, we sought to investigate the potential role of teachers' burnout as a mechanism linking pre-service teachers' daily hassles and lack of social support. So we've got two key concepts, that career optimism and teacher burnout as a linked concept. So that's stuff that you would go about and writing. We're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask, please type away. If it's something you'd like to ask privately, just send me a private message. Not a problem with that at all. And let's go back and look at that document in Word. So evidence of the problem. Now, this is something that is, people often look too far afield. They start delving into and reading about the study because it's something that interests them. But in fact, this is just asking, well, how do the authors make clear that there was a problem? So, okay, let's go ahead and let's look at that. And for this, some will have a more extensive background research thing. In most cases, it's going to be in the problem statement section itself. So here we identified that earlier in the career optimism section that this appears to be the problem statement. Okay, so what do they talk about here? And we've got, that figure there, this study here, and you can look at this and make some generalizations. See, well, there's a lot of studies that they're citing here. Okay, so I can go ahead and word that when I'm in my document here. The authors cited multiple studies as showing the extent of the problem. And you can give a supporting example. And then I'm just going to look at this and let's see, they cited 4 studies. And then just start listing things, angs in turn. Now, this doesn't have to be very long, but we need to get an idea of, okay, how are they backing up their argument? And they had an excellent question come in. And so when should I start typing papers using this template? So let's go ahead and let's look at the course website here, because it's always a good thing to start there and say, what are the published instructions that you should be following here? So I'm going to go ahead and share that web browser here. And then I'll tell you how we got from point A to point B. So here are the instructions in the course website. And you see it says, complete the attached template and follow the enclosed instructions. Copy and paste the table for each of your articles. Do not combine. And then it just lists the stuff in the table. And then we see their instructions about, okay, most of the items can be answered in a couple sentences or a short paragraph. So let's look at what we did here. So this template file here, I downloaded to my computer, and I'll show you the original. Give me just a moment to open it. And this is the file. And let's look at the instructions here. So you see that's the exact same table, and we have some instructions for how to use it. Use this template to provide us with your summary of the problems authors noted in each of your articles for the assignment. Remove these instructions and provide a proper title page and header per APA instructions. Remove the instructions within each section before submitting. So that is exactly what I did to produce the file that we were looking at, that I'm going to go back to here. So those instructions are saying, all right, so use this table, but make it look like an APA paper should. And so I pasted that into my Word document here. I pasted the table into the course paper template. So that meant that I already had the title page and these page numbers and stuff. And the instruction said, add a heading. All right, so I did exactly that. I gave each table its own heading, which is very simply noted at article number 1, article number 2, article number 3. Later on in different assignments, like when you're doing an annotated bibliography, you might want to get more specific and be like theory article number 1, theory article number 2, striving leadership theory article number 1, striving leadership article number 2. But all it says is you need a heading, and just differentiating them is fine for our purposes here. So you can do all this yourself. It just so happens that what I'm showing you is an example I've made up that saves you some of that time of doing it. And you can get right to the, all right, I'm going to fill things in. So excellent question. And if you take our regular APA course paper template and the assignment template that was provided, and then combine them as the instructions tell you to do, you will end up with what you're seeing right now. There was another question that someone asked about using this for annotated bibliographies. Yes, certainly. The annotated bibliography assignment, we have a dedicated webinar about that. But basically, the annotated bibliography assignment in any program is going to ask you to discuss key details of an article. And it's going to start with having the citation or reference information, and then you'll break down some number of pieces of information that you're asked to do in the assignment. So yes, you can certainly modify this. And I don't believe we are teaching this one. I don't believe we're teaching the annotated bibliography webinar this term, but there's a recording that is available on the website that you can watch, and it does link to copies of the template. So that is certainly available, and that's actually probably a great point for us to end on. I am going to bring up the ACU Online Writing Center website, and I'll show you the things I was just talking about. So the ACU Online Writing Center website is a place where we consolidate and keep all the latest, most recent versions of things here. So yeah, you should see my screen now. I've gone to the website, and if I go to resources, you can find our APA resources. But here we want to go to services, to writing webinars. And then if I just do a word search here for annotated, you'll find that, oh, we have our annotated bibliographies and article critiques webinar. And we also have a couple other ones, including a dedicated whole hour on just writing an annotated bibliography. So excellent questions. More than happy to answer those. We are at our finish time for this evening. So if you need to duck out now, great. If you're attending and you did not RSVP for the webinar, but you would like to receive a copy of the slide deck and a link to the recording. Just type your email address in the chat window and I will add you to that list. Anyone who RSVPs to one of our webinars will automatically get a copy of the recording and the slide deck afterwards. So thank you for coming. Have a good evening, everyone. I'll stick around for a couple minutes in case anyone has any last minute questions that they want to add, but we are done. Feel free to enjoy the rest of the evening.